Today on LA Currents, it is known as the birthplace of LA. Located between Main and Alameda, people have enjoyed the food, music, events, and merchandise of this historic street since 1930. Next, he has a doctorate in educational leadership. He is also the president and CEO who is determined to create academic success for children in poverty. But first, she is the creator of change and a representative of the California's 37th Congressional District. Karen Bass is a staunch advocate for social justice and equity. We talked with her about her public policy and her legislation concerns. Well, she's currently serving her 6th term in Congress. Prior to that, she was part of the California State Assembly. As a matter of fact, she made history as the first African-American woman to serve as Speaker in any U.S. legislative state body. I am honored to be joined today by Congressmember Karen Bass. So lovely to have you here.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Absolutely. You have been serving in Congress, as I mentioned, for this is your 6th term. Mm-hmm. How are things going there?
Well, I will tell you, it's a bit of a mixed bag.
Okay.
There are issues that I know it will shock people that we work on in a bipartisan manner.
That's nice to hear.
But actually, since January 6th, it was a pretty profound change. I mean, the violence that happened at the Capitol that shook all of us has led to increased polarization. And so I think that part of it has been bad. But we do work on issues together. For example, one of the key issues I work on is trying to change the nation's child welfare system. And that's an issue that I work very closely with my Republican colleagues. I also focus on foreign policy. So when it comes to a lot of foreign policy issues, we do that in a bipartisan manner. It's just that what gets all of the attention is when we don't get along, not when we do get along.
Well, there's so much to talk to you about, but top of mind, of course, is the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which you introduced in February.
My job was to get it out of the House. That job was finished on March 3rd, and it has been languishing in the Senate. But what my concern is that a year plus later since the murder of George Floyd, the momentum is actually going in the other direction because crime has ticked up, which was completely predictable. So what I'm worried about is that the best time for us to have passed that bill was when there were hundreds of thousands of people on the street.
And the main points in that bill that you feel most passionate about that really need to be addressed, what would you say they are?
It's the part of the bill that holds officers accountable, because I think all of us are tired of seeing these awful videos. But I also think that the profession of policing needs to be uplifted. So part of the bill also calls for accreditation and training. Do you know that we have 18,000 police departments in the country and 18,000 ways of doing policing?
Right.
So in some cities, chokeholds are illegal. In other cities, they're fine. And so it's about uplifting the profession, creating standards. You would think that the profession that has the power to take away your freedom and take away your life, there should be a lot more accountability there.
You mentioned the infrastructure bill, and that seems to have some bipartisan support,
yes,
which is positive in a lot of ways. Directly here with the 37th, how will that help Los Angeles? What are some of the elements that we would actually see trickle down, even if it's in a while, that will help the infrastructure here in LA?
Well, first of all, Los Angeles and California, we didn't wait for Washington.
Good.
We went ahead and funded many infrastructure projects, but we need a lot more. I mean, one of the #1 complaints in our city is traffic. Mm-hmm. And so resources that will help us build out our infrastructure for light rail and subways, all of that, being able to repair our streets. One of the things that I really like about the approach that's being taken is that we're viewing infrastructure broadly. So the fact that we still have lead pipes for water, I mean, everybody looked at the problem that happened in Michigan, but remember what happened in Flint with water and where, you know, the community had lead in their water for a very long time. That's really all around the country. If you look at the sewage lines, the water lines, etc. Now, the bill that's bipartisan is in the Senate. So I have not seen what is exactly in the bill because they're still negotiating it, and we are in recess, the House is, but the Senate isn't. Mm-hmm. And so I know that there will be lots of resources for Los Angeles. But That's one bill. The second bill is human infrastructure, looking at child care, looking at education, looking at other parts of the infrastructure that we need to build out.
Why is it possible for there to be bipartisan support for some issues and impossible for others? What is it that shuts things down?
So I think two things. One are ideological issues, which I'll address in a minute, and the other are campaigns. So for example, some of my colleagues do not believe in a woman's right to choose. And so typically then they don't want to get into any issues related to reproductive health, including I don't support abortion, but I'm also not going to provide contraception. So that is an ideological issue where people just disagree. When it comes to an issue like crime, for example, is more political. So a member of Congress is worried that if they support police reform or if they support criminal justice reform, they might be viewed as soft on crime, and their opponent might wage a campaign against them for being soft on crime. So I would divide it that way. One is political and the other is ideological. People are so concerned about their reelection that they pass laws that to be as punitive as possible. So in the state of California, when I was in the legislature, we banned people who were formerly incarcerated from being able to be licensed in 56 different occupations. And I'll tell you the craziest one. In state prison, we teach people to be barbers, but then we don't allow people that have been in prison to have a barbering license.
Oh dear.
So we were able to change that, but that's an example. So during the years of getting tough on crime, we passed more and more and more punitive laws and didn't realize that we were essentially banning people from working. Mm-hmm. Well, if you can't work in the legal economy, what do you think you're going to do?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. You are extremely important and you've been a role model for a lot of people.
Thank you.
How are things for women and women of color in positions of power? Is it improving? Are you watching your constituency and you're watching those that you work with rise up in the ranks? Are they facing are they not having to face some of the issues that you had to face? Is it getting better in that regard?
I think it absolutely is getting better. And, you know, again, fortunate to come from Los Angeles and California, that's a much more progressive-minded state. Some of my colleagues who come from more conservative states have more challenges. But look who's at the helm, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, mm-hmm. who is essentially, you know, over the 4 years of the last administration, kept our government afloat. And when the history book is written on the Trump years, it will lift up the fact that she played the most significant leadership role in the U.S. government.
Okay, so there's also a lot of issues with inclusion, and mm-hmm. I'm speaking to that a little bit now, but also how are those playing out across Congress? What are some of the things that maybe people haven't necessarily heard because they're not front page news, they're not as controversial, that are being put into place that will help with equanimity and inclusion?
Well, you know what? The most exciting thing on that account is an administration that put equity and inclusion front and center in his inauguration speech. And having somebody like Ambassador Susan Rice, who's the director of Domestic Policy Council, and she's the one that's in charge of looking at all of the various agencies in the federal government to make sure that they are addressing equity and inclusion. And we've made sure that the bills that we passed, the resources that went out, we tried to pay attention to those individuals and sectors that fall through the cracks, like minority businesses and all. And in the infrastructure package, equity and inclusion is front and center as well.
And then also I was excited to see, will there be a Muslim American Heritage Month?
Yes, there'll be a Muslim American Heritage Month. We now have 4 members of Congress, 3 or 4 members of Congress that are Muslim.
And what can we look forward to? What will that mean? That'll just mean an opportunity to celebrate
Yes, it's more ceremonial, mm-hmm. but it's also done because of all of the anti-Muslim rhetoric over the last few years. And so to lift up and acknowledge the Muslim American community and to have that Heritage Month, what that will do is that people will speak and acknowledge, and it just lifts up their presence.
Yes, you do have a life of politics, but you have a reputation of action. and actually doing things and not just talking about them.
That's the highest compliment you could give me, because to me it really is about what I can do to make a difference in people's lives. It's not about the pomp and circumstance. It's not about the glory. I'm still trying to find the glory. I haven't found it. These jobs are hard work, and I think that a lot of times people think that what elected officials do is run around to events and all of that. But the job is getting legislation done that actually impacts people, not symbolic legislation, but legislation that makes a difference.
I really do mean this. It's been an honor and a privilege to spend this time with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Likewise.
Arturo Chávez is the general manager of El Pueblo de Los Angeles. We sat down with him to learn more about this cultural attraction and living museum that captivates more than 2 million visitors a year. Well, designated a historic landmark in 1972, we are actually sitting in the Pico House, which is part of the El Pueblo de Los Angeles Historic Monument, and I am delighted to be joined by the general manager of this magnificent area, Arturo Chávez. So nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Maria. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
All right, so we're in one tiny piece of this El Pueblo Historic Monument, so it encompasses what?
Well, the Pueblo Historic Monument encompasses 44 acres. That include 8 museums and galleries, historic structures. You're sitting in the Pico House, the first hotel in Los Angeles. We have the firehouse, which is the first firehouse in Los Angeles. We have the Placita Church, which is across the street. We have the Casa Avila Adobe, which is the first home and the oldest house in Los Angeles, built in 1818. We also have the Sepulveda House. We have the famous Siqueiros mural. So we're bounded by all of these historic structures and locations.
I have so many questions, but just because I've never been in the Pico House before, this structure itself, you said it was a hotel?
First hotel in Los Angeles. Pio Pico was the first Mexican governor of the state of California. It was a partnership with him and Antonio Cuyo, right? And it was the architect was Ursa Kaiser. So it's quite a spectacular location. It's been preserved, and it still looks beautiful.
Yes, definitely. And this is sort of an esoteric question, but you listed all of the things that are here and the importance of them and the historic relevance. But how does that information and that awareness actually change a life?
Well, there's a lot of reasons that it changes people's and impacts lives. It depends. Everybody's experience is different, obviously. But, example, the 44 pobladores that started here, right, when there's a plaque here at the plaza, when people see the names and who they were, that creates a whole different reality for people who founded this place. Although Spain, King Carlos III was the one that initiated Governor Felipe Neves to come and found this location. The people that actually founded it were indigenous people. They were blacks. There were different individuals that came here. And so you're looking at a group of people that, you thought like, oh, I thought it was just a bunch of Spaniards that came and did this, which is fine. But you see now that it's quite a mix of folks that came to found the city of Los Angeles, similar to what the city is now. That's one impression that people have.
All right, Olvera Street and the merchants and the fact that, they're back, because that is probably something a lot of people think about, especially if they want to come enjoy the city and great food and fun things to buy, etc. But the merchants themselves are an interesting component to all of this, because a lot of them have actually been here for decades, or their family businesses. So there's a lot of history there too, is there not?
Yes, I mean, the merchants were founded in 1930 through Christine Sterling on Easter Sunday. These merchants have been, many of these are families that have been around here for over 91 years. The majority of these merchants have been, obviously they're not the actual initial merchants, but their families have been here since 1930. Some of which, for example, started out as shoeshine boys, their families, their grandfathers, and ended up getting business here. And so they still are here present. They have been determined a cultural resource through the city. And what we've looked at is that those families have survived and have had a lot of success with their, children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and they've grown up here on the street. Kids have grown up here and knowing each other since, they were working with the shops and with their families, right?
There's a lot of art and there's lots of murals, but there's one mural in particular, the Siqueiros mural.
David Alfaro Siqueiros painted this mural in 1932. It was quite a shock when it was revealed. He was one of the biggest Mexican muralists, along with Diego Rivera and Orozco, and he was also believed in public art, and that art should be for everyone, right? And so walls should be covered with art, right? And as a result of that, this mural has been conserved.
Why was it controversial?
The major theme in the middle of the thing was an indigenous person strapped to a double cross with an American eagle overhead, invoking the imperialism of the United States.
You could spend multiple days here because it's not just a one-stop, and even you were saying that there are a number of organizations that are now housed here and do good works here, and there's a lot of changing of exhibits in specific spaces. What are some of the secrets that people may not think of right off the top of their mind when they're thinking about coming up? Obviously, they're going to go to Olvera Street. They might go to the Adobe, but what are some of the don't miss, even though you may not realize it's their places?
There is, obviously, we've mentioned the other museums, like the Chinese American Museum that people don't go to, and also the firehouse that people are not aware of when they think of Olvera Street, right? The firehouse and the Chinese American Museum. But those museums are very important to show, as the firehouse was one of the first firehouses here. You also have a lot of other small hidden places here in Olvera Street. We also have the Methodist Church here that has a Museum of Social Justice in the basement. So there are other places that can be viewed and tours that can be taken and given to you.
If in fact things stay stable, now you get to do everything you were hoping to do before you ended up living in a virtual world and in a lockdown city. What did you hope that you were going to be able to do, and now have you altered what you have hoped to do, knowing what you know with 18 months of thought, or do you have certain plans that you want to pursue? What's on the future docket for the area?
Well, immediately what we want to do is reinstitute some of the cultural events that happen here on a regular basis.
Okay.
Right? So we have what they call the Day of the Dead or the Dia de los Muertos events here in October 20th to November 2nd. And that's preceded by an art walk, generally speaking. And then we also have like Las Posadas, which is a 9-day celebration with music and dancers and everything else. We continue that, with as we go through October and going through, right, these are cultural events that happen on a regular and consistent basis that bring thousands and thousands of people here to experience these types of events. And so we want to reinstitute those cultural events that are in partnership with the Olvera Street Merchants Association Foundation. And for me, personally, what we'd like to do is reestablish this place as a premier tourist location and historical location for not only just the tourism, but also for kids that we talked about and college students, right? It is important that people understand what the history is of the city of Los Angeles and where we come from and how we've developed as a city and as a nation. And I think it all begins here. And so I think that people need to come in and appreciate the cultural events, appreciate the structures, appreciate the buildings for what they are, and the artwork that is everywhere here. And I think that once we do that and establish that, we should be one of the premier locations that people come from all over the world to see how Los Angeles, this huge city, started out in such a small location and spread out to be one of the largest cities and one of the biggest influencers around the country.
And on a very practical note, it's actually very easy to get here because you're across the street from Union Station.
Yes, it's very easy to get here through, Union Station is a hub, obviously, and with the connections that we have now with, all the different lines that are coming through, it is a place that you can come to, get off the train, come and visit, and get back on and go somewhere else.
If people want to get current on what's happening here and making sure that when they get here, they know what they can look forward to, what's the easiest way for someone to get information?
Facebook, Twitter, at El Pueblo LA, and also elpueblo.lacity.org.
Next, Para Los Niños is a grassroots community organization. We talk with Drew Ferretti, the president and CEO, about their continuing mission to offer resources that will support and educate children and families. It was in 1980 that a social worker, Tanya Tull, saw that there was a need to help the youth in Skid Row. Well, needless to say, a lot has changed with the program since then, and I'm delighted today to be joined by the CEO and president of Para Los Niños, Drew Ferretti. Okay, 1980, one person, one space, who knows how many children that were being helped, cut to 40 plus years later. Oh my word.
It's breathtaking.
It
right?
is.
It's amazing. I think amazing from a number of points. One is that here's, as you said, here's a social worker who sees something in the social conditions of youth and says, this will not be. And gets a bunch of civic-minded people to say, okay, you're right. It cannot be, not in this place. And go and rehab a warehouse. And like you said, fast forward 41 years. We are in 17 locations across LA, doing everything from working with babies in our preschools and in our early education centers, all the way up to youth that have been knocked off the path, and we're helping to partner with them to get back on the path, and everything in between. We have mental health therapists, we have family case aides and case managers and social workers, all saying what is in the way of success? Well, it shouldn't be.
Sure. Well, and I mean, needless to say, it's not surprising that what Tanya saw as a social worker, just a safe space for children to, to play and to learn, etc., has morphed and changed and everything over the years. But where are you seeing Para Los Niños needing to go with all of this new information and all of these new concerns that you have realized over the last 18 months, but also over the last 41 years?
Yeah. That's a great question.
It's a big answer, so don't try to
yeah,
make it go away.
I'll just react a few different ways. One is, look, it goes a little bit to that deepening of the work. Mm-hmm. I think some people think about, like, what's the future of an organization? They think about how do you expand the number of people you're impacting and supporting. We think about this not about how many more will we serve, but how deep do we need to get and can we get. So for us, that's adding social workers or adding family support specialists or people that are there to really be right next to parents, right next to students. What is it that's going on and how can we help? This stuff works. The idea of thinking about things holistically, it works.
You had to do a pivot just like everyone else had to do a pivot.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, how was that for you?
Awe-inspiring in so many ways. I was saying to somebody the other day that I feel like we not that we're done, because we're far from done, but thinking back at, we're getting ready for a new school year and all those things, thinking back to what could have happened and what did happen, I feel like in some ways we're stronger than we ever were. And this has been, like, for our staff, for our families, for our all students and youth, this has been remarkably painful. Right? Like, I don't have to tell you, you know it, you see it. everybody's had a loss in some ways, and some of them have been just cut so deep. But we maintained all of our services. We flipped to remote like many others did. We maintained all of our services, and then we sort of stood up in areas where we didn't do work prior. So
food delivery,
million boxes or meals of food out over the last, however long this has been, 18 months if we're saying that now. We've had devices, additional devices when the hotspots didn't work, Chromebooks, formula, diapers, you name it, it's been going out. So doing that while we're also maintaining the connection and the personal, it goes back to the relationship. Really knowing that for many people, Para Los Niños team is a trusted neighborhood and community resource, and really to make sure that we make the most of that.
How many people are you helping?
In a typical year prior to COVID, we really work with about 6,000 children, youth, and families every year, and that's gone up just in the work that we've been doing. And we'll see what we already know that there's the needs have, if anything, they've deepened because of what the world is going through.
Mental health, have you noticed that part of your work is growing?
Absolutely.
And the need for that part of your work is growing?
Absolutely. So I think maybe a good thing if you think about the entire world about, and I think that's from a K-12 perspective, but just from across the landscape perspective. A good thing is that more people are talking about and maybe moving towards an acceptance of a school is about more than just your academic standards. Success is about a whole range of things, a holistic approach. So there's, I think, greater acceptance now about just social emotional wellness, mental health awareness, the need to attend to those things. We have an opportunity to really push to further destigmatize. The idea of mental health is somehow something you don't talk about, or it makes you less than.
You can't do it alone.
Right.
You've obviously gotten wonderful partnerships, as you mentioned, fiscal support from an interesting array, including most recently, you even got some federal money. What can the Tanya Tulls of the world do? People who just don't have the wherewithal to just work for you full time or give you the amazing fiscal support they'd like. But what if they just want to help?
We have a range of volunteer opportunities, and both short-term and long-term. I think we're probably pretty standard on that. But the diversity of opportunities is, I think, kind of cool. Not a technical term, but everything from reading to with very young children to interview prep and resume review, and helping a youth who's had a bumpy path but is ready to really soar, helping them get ready for a college interview or an application or a job or their first job interview. Like we have all of that, plus communities defining their own issues and saying, we are leaders. You're not doing for, you might do with. We are online, www.paralosninos.org, and we are at paralosninos.org, all one, on all the social media channels. But there's opportunities there on the website. We always tell people, we always say to ourselves at least, if we get people down to one of our sites, one of our centers, one of our schools, you're hooked, because just the power of potential is just, it grabs you.
Well, how delightful to talk with you today, and how inspiring in so many ways. And you are a very mindful person. I can sense it from across the table, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, it was great chatting.
Likewise. Thank you.